It was a busy week on Capitol Hill. The House Appropriations Committee passed an education spending bill that would significantly increase federal K 12 funding and prioritize new funds to high poverty districts. Congressional Democrats also announced a $3.5 trillion framework, which would expand free public education by 4 years as proposed in President Biden's American Families Plan. And finally, the Senate held confirmation hearings for three more Biden administration nominations to the Education Department. Hi, I'm Ann Heislip, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Ziyu Zhou. Ziyu, what's in the House Education Appropriations Bill?
Thanks, Ann. Last week, the House Appropriations Committee passed a $65.6 billion K-12 education funding bill for fiscal year 2022, which begins at the end of September. The 62% increase would significantly boost the federal investment in K-12 education. In particular, it more than doubles funding for the Title I program to $36 billion, an historic investment in the education of students in high poverty communities. What's more, to improve funding equity, the bill would allocate nearly 80% of the new Title I funds through the Targeted Grants and Education Finance Incentive Grants, or EFIG, formulas. Targeted grants provide greater funding to schools serving high numbers or concentrations of low-income students. EFIG provides additional funding to states based on the equity and effort of their school finance systems. As one of our long-standing priorities, we're excited by the committee's commitment to advancing equity and their proposal to target additional much-needed federal resources to chronically underserved communities.
To be clear, the Title I increase in the House Appropriations Bill differs from President Biden's $20 billion proposal for new equity grants in his fiscal year 2022 budget request that we discussed on a previous Federal Flash. The Appropriations Bill increases the total funding that flows through the existing Title I formulas, while the equity grants would have created a new and separate funding mechanism designed to address state and local resource inequities. Beyond Title I, the Appropriations Bill also increases funding for special education, educator development, English learners, and the Department's Office for Civil Rights. Full-service community schools would see the most dramatic increase, boosting funding from $30 to $443 million. The charter school program, however, sees a slight cut from $440 to $400 million, along with a prohibition on funds supporting charter schools operated by for-profit organizations. The bill faces considerable opposition from Republicans and a long road before becoming law, especially as any funding bill coming out of the House would need to be reconciled with the Senate. We'll keep you posted.
Sticking with large spending proposals, congressional Democrats announced a deal on a $3.5 trillion human infrastructure framework to go along with the bipartisan framework focused on more traditional infrastructure. The deal includes an expansion to the child tax credit, investments to combat climate change, and 4 additional years of public education. To pay for it, the proposal includes new taxes on corporations and the wealthiest Americans. This framework builds on proposals put forth in President Biden's American Families Plan, which we discussed on a previous Federal Flash. We agree with President Biden that 12 years of public education is insufficient to meet the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century, and we're pleased the framework includes universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds and 2 years of free community college.
The framework, however, is just a framework at this point, not a full plan or bill. As such, other education-related proposals are on the table, such as funding free school meals for all students and funding to close the homework gap and expand access to high-quality broadband. Once the bill is finalized, Democrats plan to pass it through the reconciliation process to avoid a potential Senate filibuster. Unlike other pieces of legislation requiring 60 votes to end debate, reconciliation bills need only 51 votes, but the bills must pertain to tax and spending. With Democrats having 51 votes, only with Vice President Harris breaking the tie, the $3.5 trillion framework will likely need support from all 50 Democratic senators to have a chance at becoming law. Moreover, the Senate parliamentarian, a nonpartisan official, must rule whether all of the spending proposals can be included under the reconciliation rules. We'll keep you posted.
Meanwhile, the Senate Education Committee held confirmation hearings on 3 of President Biden's key nominees to the U.S. Department of Education: Catherine Lehman to be Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, Lisa Brown to be General Counsel, and Roberto Rodriguez to be Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development. While the hearings for Brown and Rodriguez were fairly smooth, Lehman's was far more contentious. Republicans on the committee asked her questions on politically charged topics, including racial discrimination, campus-based sexual assault, and transgender students in school sports. Despite the tough questions, all 3 appear to be on track for confirmation by the full Senate in the coming months.
Finally, we'd like to remind our viewers of the upcoming August 13th application deadline for the FCC's emergency connectivity funding included in the American Rescue Plan. As we've discussed previously, it provides $7.2 billion to increase internet and technology access by helping schools and libraries purchase laptops, wireless hotspots, and broadband. We're hosting a webinar for district and school leaders about the Emergency Connectivity Funding Program on Thursday, July 22nd at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. The webinar will feature guests from the FCC and will cover the program, how funding may be used, and the application process. You can register at the link below. That's all for today. For an alert when the next Federal Flash is available, email alliance@allfored.org. Thanks for watching.
Federal Flash is the Alliance for Excellent Education's video series on important developments in education policy in Washington, D.C. Watch online at allfored.org/federalflash, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or listen to Federal Flash wherever you get your podcasts.